Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANS processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you, everybody. Welcome to the Kesh American Knowledge Team meeting of 2025. We are continuing on this series to deliver the plasma science in bite-sized pieces. And thank you all for being part of the journey. So I hope you enjoy the trip. As Mark has mentioned, we are going to start on a new session here. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are advancing into the advanced GANS tech. Subject today is sunflowers, and my name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is November the 30th, believe it or not, of 2025. This is part of the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So welcome, everybody. As you know, that we were just completing the intermediate GANS Tech series, and we ended up talking about the GANS of the GANSes. And today we're going to go into the advanced GANS Tech and discuss many other things. As we've seen, we have been trying to condense this over the years, and it has been, well, it has been a challenge, because the knowledge just keeps on coming. But this is the knowledge of the universe, and we have denied ourselves the access to that. And so this is an excellent forum to learn about that. But I must emphasize that despite the fact that we are all students of this science, we all also become teachers, and we need to be able to teach in our own way. So please take from this in the manner that you can do, because we are now in the beyond Beijing era of May the 10th of 2025. The 2025 gold rush has begun, and it will continue. So many of you may be getting the gold fever, but let's understand that what we are doing is seeking the practical application of the books of Marin Tavakoli Kesh, such as book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And let's make sure that we understand that is coming together of 3 energy fields that we call matter, dark matter, and antimatter. And that is the terminology that is used by the conventional science. But the thing is that we also have book number 2, The Structure of the Light, which means we come from this universal creation of matter in one point, and we have another universal creation of matter in another point. And so there is a go between. And so that there's a coming and going. And as we've said many times, it's a two-way street. So when we get to book number 3, we see this one-way street of the origin of the universe that comes from a central point. a dimension point that breaks up into two, what we call man's universe and the sister universe. And of course, our focal point is man's universe, and that point on man's universe is our Earth space, which is another tiny point. So we are looking at a point on a point on a point as part of the origin of the universe. And why do we keep continuing to gravitate, shall we say, to these tiny schemes when we understand that one of the ways to diminish what we're doing is through fragmentation? But for 406 weeks, Rick Crammond and the members of the Universal Council have been trying to bring together the one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace. And that is from the humanity point of view. And that is not the only point of view. There is another point of view where we have experienced what we call angular density. We see that with satellites, how they fall out of the sky. And we understand that every time they rotate around the planet, they are falling through weakness and they're increasing density. So that density is what they're experiencing. And in that process, increasing pressure. So we interpret that as increased gravity. But in reality, it's an increased dependence on Earth space feeding. And so we get this internal pressure of these different GANS fields because that is where the angular momentum is actually conserved. So there always has to be a balance. And so when we look at this balance, and how does it relate to the plasma rule? So we have been looking at it as where the higher strength eats the weaker strength, but in reality, according to the plasma rule, the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. So you can pick whichever way you want to interpret that rule, and God help you with your success rate, because when these two fields come together, that's what we call the transaction zone. But we have possibilities. One, it could be a conflict point, but it could also be a binding zone. But there are other options. The most important from our perspective is that it manifests, and that manifestation is based on density. And so this density manifestation is the product of two fields coming together, and the product field is the inertia. And so you look at the combination of the plasma rule and how the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And this is the skill set that we have to determine which is the higher and which is the weaker. And what do we mean by that? The product is the inertia density manifestation. And so what are we trying to complete? Well, we don't seem to be in control of that. And we are, shall we say, kind of lost. So we need commandments. So we've been given commandments, and the first one is, I am the Lord your God. And in a way, we have interpreted that as two words that are synonyms. But of course, when we look at the overall picture and we include the completion of the missing commandments, we find that it paints a different picture. The one that I keep harping on is number 11, thou shalt not lie. And the reason for that is because poker is a great game, and we really like to play that on this planet. And sometimes we get very excited when the stakes are very high, right? But it really doesn't matter. And this is true if you've ever been a coach in the minor leagues. You find that the intensity of the players is just as much as that of the professional players. So the level of the game, whether it's a two-bit ante or whether it's $1 million on the table, really doesn't matter. What matters is that you have to be a skillful liar, and so the success comes to you. But it's not guaranteed because there's always this element of chance, and so you have to pick your spots, and then you place your bets. But when you get into outer space, that doesn't follow. And it's confounding to understand why are we depending on this energy binding means. Of course, it's self-serving because that's our dimension point. And we have to understand that that is the product of three fields. And those fields are me, myself, and I. But with this energy binding, we've chosen in most cases to do this at the expense of others who also have this binding need of me, myself, and I. And so it doesn't allow for me, myself, and whatever else you can steal from me, and I will compensate for it. Or, if it's really painful to me, I may even retaliate. And so you have what's a binding point becomes a conflict point. And this is how we structure our life because we see the success. And what do we want with our success? Well, we want vitality because what we have grown up with is a prospect of becoming old and decrepit. And as we've done that, we've realized that those two words do not belong in the same sentence. It's only we apply that because it's kind of, accepted. But in reality, this is in stark comparison to young and decrepit. And so it isn't age related, it is vitality related. So we have adults who are leaking their vitality, and that vitality is actually the loosh. The loosh is the energy of the vitality. And we see that as basically only in an emotional and a physical context, and that's all we attribute it to. But because we're discussing the advanced GANS tech, we have to understand that the GANS is at the root of this emotional and physical transformation. And so what we're seeking is a vitality enhancement, and that's what the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute is delivering. So it's time to gas up. Also, in terms of our knowledge, we now have to see that there are other factors at play that maybe we don't understand or don't want to understand. And it's partly not only because we may not have the proper education, but we may not have the proper education. So it all depends on what you want to study, what you give your time and attention to. So, if you're looking at the reruns of the I Love Lucy show, well, enjoy yourself. But if you're wanting to understand the purpose of life, then you have to start to connect the dots. These are the practical points. And what we're trying to deliver is the practical reasoning. So the road to self-determination or the road from self-determination involves a practical philosophy encapsulating practical solutions. And so when we look at the practical currency of life and we see that this involves mitochondria, which are part of the plants, it's also part of the cells, and the plants, the vertical people, and we as the horizontal people have mitochondria. And these give us the energy that allows us to function. And this is the currency of the creator. So we need to really delve into that in this series. And so when we're talking about sunflowers, we have to understand that there are overlapping fields. When we look at the sunflower, wait a second, this doesn't look anything like a sunflower. This just kind of looks like three different fields, and they're overlapping. And so that is the difference between the physicality and the animate world. Because in the physicality, more than three in a chain are a polymer. But in the animate world, more than three in a chain fold over into a protein. And so each part, each field has a gravitational magnetical relationship. So there's the inner circle, then the next field, and then the outer field. And each one has its own magnetical gravitational relationship. And so you thought this was a sunflower. No, this is how the fields interact. This is a sunflower, right? And so you see the different fields and how they're overlapping. And yes, there's a stem, but let's forget that stem for now because that just complicates things. Let's just deal with the flower itself. And so when you look at the singularity of each field, you have to understand that there's a duality of the maggrav of the inertia field. So in other words, all of these fields coming together create a formation that we see as a sunflower. Well, how do you account for the difference of all these fields? Isn't that the question? And is that only applicable to sunflowers, or what about water hyacinths? I mean, look at this freak show. You have these beautiful round green leaves, and they are one field that is balanced by its magnetical gravitational relationship. And then you have this starburst of flowers, and they themselves are coming in three, and they have a gravitational magnetical relationship. And then, of course, the rest of the plant is the roots, because this floats above the water. The roots are below the water, and they themselves have a gravitational magnetical relationship. So here you have the whole structure of the plant demonstrating the overlapping fields. And then, of course, our favorite is our daisy. And the reason the daisy was favored was because not only do we have different fields, let's say we have the gravitational magnetical field of the core, but the gravitational magnetical field of the white petals, but then we also have the gravitational magnetical field of the seeds. But what is unique here is that the core gravitational field has a spiral pattern in a hexagonal format, and somehow it stops. And so we can delineate that by the difference between the yellow portion and the white portion. But the white portion has petals, and they don't look anything like a hexagonal format. We discussed this before. So the point of the matter is the complete flower has different overlapping fields that constitute that flower, but clearly they are in a different shape. So this is the subject that we have to look at today, because we're talking about the GANS tech, and this is the advancement of the nanocoating process of the monatomic science. So we have made the cups of life, and we call them the cups of life and not the cups of the pandemic, because we're not worried about the harmful effects. We are concerned with what we're creating, and we can create whatever we want to create. So in this case, we created an emotional cup and we created a physical cup. And in addition, we were able to create other GANSs, carbon dioxide, calcium, zinc, and copper GANS, for instance, and also amino acid and water. And isn't it interesting that water and oil don't mix? And so we were able to create two GANSs that were separate in that regard. And of course, we are now experiencing the gold rush because we have the gold in GANSs as well. And then, of course, when we go to the cup of the universe, which is an extension of the same format, we see that there are two hemispheres in the brain, and they relate to the copper GANS, which is the physical, and the zinc GANS, which is emotional, and then the carbogen, which is the connection to the universe. And when these three come together, we create the cup of the universe. But the cup of the universe is connected to the physicality. So we have one, and we have one, and we have another one. They come together with these three fields, just as we did in the universal order of creation of matter. And plus, we have the physicality, and we don't lose anything. This is a continual process. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about the transmutation highway. When we're looking at the carbon 12, the lowest level there, that is our transmission highway. That's our physicality. When we go to the carbon 14, which is an isotope, that is our transition highway, which allows us to elevate or to decay. And then, of course, there's a transmutation highway, the carbon 16 being the gateway to that particular highway. So we understand these cup relationships. So each and every cup relationship has a magnetical gravitational relationship. And then from that comes your soul radiance. So whether it's the cup of the emotion or the cup of the physicality or the cup of the soul, you have these three relationships. But in order for any manifestation to occur, you need an environment to do that. And of course, we have our earth space. And so that earth cup also has a magnetical gravitational relationship, and ergo a soul radiance. And so the interaction of that soul radiance with the interaction with the cup relationships creates your cup of inertia. And that manifests a soul radiance as well. And so there are your basic 5 cups. And so we have elevated ourselves to the next position where we are making the GANS of the GANS, which is to say, if we take the cup of emotion and add another cup of emotion to that, we can create another GANS field. And that becomes the new transaction zone. So in order to understand the energy transfer, we have to understand that ray motion is creation. And we have a choice based on the plasma rule, either to do a natural creation or to do a natural decay. So if we look at the balance between the creation and the decay, then we have a field. We have to understand that there's a counteracting counterweight, a natural decay and a natural creation. And then between those two is another transaction zone, which is a boundary, but it is also a bonding zone. And if we don't understand it, then, we kind of slough it off or round it off, and we fudge the whole thing. But in the plasma science, we need to be a little bit more precise, because energy always is positive, but energy is always in motion. So the direction of that motion is based on the charge. So the emission out of that field is magnetical, and the absorption is gravitational. So this we refer to as the polar energy, and the strength of that is determined by the speed and the rotation and the field strength, and of course the direction of flow. And the direction of flow is either magnetical or gravitational. But since it's a two-way street, then we have to look at the net difference. So one street has a certain field strength, another street has a certain field strength, but in the opposite direction. But these two field strengths are not the same. So the difference between these two is the gradient, and it becomes an inertia field, and that is the product. And so that determines on what we are, what we have, and where are we going? So when we look at GANS and how it flows in water, we can see that we know that water can exchange energy. So water can give and take energy. So we can take the energy from the GANS and we can drink that water, and that water will give us energy. GANS does the same thing, gives and takes energy. So if we understand that GANS is exchanging continually magnetical energy and gravitational energy, and that's how the GANS can flow within the water. And we are bags of GANS. And when they do an analysis of humanity, they say we have more than 75% content as water. So we can see the affinity between the water and the GANS. And then, of course, we can see how the GANS affects the earth matter. And we have to ask ourselves, well, is that a transaction in singularity or in duality? So we cannot have an inertia density manifestation without two fields facilitating that manifestation. And so that's how we get all the various GANSes of the Earth GANSes. In fact, we can achieve GANSes of every single element in the periodic table of elements, because when they come together, they are all products, and they are all product of what we call a nuclear feeding inertia. So each and every one is a fragment of the complexity. What is the complexity? Well, it's the Earth space, and that has a gravitational stability. But these fragments also have a gravitational stability. So each of them is portable in their dimension, whatever that dimension may be. And that dimension would be a fragment, and all the fragments together manifest the whole. And so there's a relationship, and each of these fragments are a dimension point. So now we have an interaction of these various dimension points, and this is why we have so many range details in our Earth space. So the most important one for our animation is carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, and hydrogen, and that is one group. But we also have the silicon, the phosphorus, the sulfur, and the chlorine, which are part of another group. And then, of course, we have the copper and the zinc representing our physicality and our emotional strength, and the iron, which represents our inner strength of blood. And then, of course, we have this gold fever. And of course, what is the medium? Well, it's always related to either sodium, magnesium, potassium, or calcium. And these are all fundamental to our facilitation of the various dimension points. So when we look at the Peace Dome reactor, and what we demonstrated in Beijing was that we were able to create a shielding. That is one dimension point between two plasma fields. And we had a start positioning. That's another dimension point. And then we manifest a possession. Well, that's another dimension point. So we were able to create three different dimension points, and they all work together. And so this is the point that we're trying to drive together today, is that when we look at the arrival of humanity matter, then we have a singularity of each field, but we have a duality of the magrab of the inertia field. And then each of these, whether it's matter, dark matter, or antimatter, goes through this conversion. And that conversion will either give us the inorganic earth space or the organic human space. And so we have not the falling, but we have the arrival of the humanity matter. So this arrival is coming from this feeding of the inertia GANS matter. So each one is a singular, and they coming together in duality of the magrav of the inertia field. And so our destination was an Earth space. So the Earth space was a manifestation, the human space was a manifestation, and the interaction of the two represent both an inertia density manifestation, and the location of that manifestation is determined by the field strength and by the nearness and proximity to other fields and their strengths. So this is the rule by which principal matter works. The PM ticks are magnetical because they are always emissive. They are part of the energy packs that are diverging all throughout the universe, but they are converging in their force fields and being diluted into the principal matter, the transition matter, and the convergence matter. So these are all part of the plasma matter. But when they interact with the Earth and its plasma matter, we call that field interaction inertia, and we create a product that is the gravitational magrav of our existence. And that is the fundamental coming together. So we have to understand that there are two pathways. There's the magrav created to the gravitational intensity of attraction, we call feedback, and the magnetical outintensity of repulsion, which we call feeding. And in scientific terms and nuclear science, we refer to one as the electron as the giver and the neutron, of course, as the taker. And of course, you can see the difference between these two. And then the other problem, of course, is that we are so physical, we depend on what we can touch and what we can see, and that is our gravitational stability. But we are enjoying things that we cannot touch or cannot see. They're more emotional, or they're feelings. We call them feelings. They're magnetical, but they're still part of the matter plasma dimension. And that's how we relate to everything. And these are all part of the feedback. And we are feedback dominant. What are we feedbacking to? Well, that is an important question, because we talk about the counterweights and how we measure them. So in physical state, the gravitational counterweight is weight, and the atomic state is mass. The counterweight is magnetical. In the nuclear state, we measure it in Teslas, and in the plasma state, we measure that by time. So right there and then, we have a conflict in our understanding, because we are measuring the distance of the various stars in our universe by time. And that measurement is in a physical state. That's where the anomaly is sitting. So we have to understand that there are conservations at work here. So our plasma matter dilemma is that we understand the atomic state, the nanostate, and the GANS state, and that's what we're talking about today, is the advanced GANS tech. But the substructure is the plasma state. And this plasma state is still part of the matter state, because you cannot have the physical matter state without the substructure of the plasma state. So by the nearness and proximity to the physical matter state, this plasma state is part of the matter state. And it's always balanced. So each motion through each energy state is a magrav energy transfer state. And the steepness of the gradient is determined by the path length and susceptibility. So a plasma state can affect a GANS state, but a plasma state can also affect an atomic state. So there's no rule that says you have to go from one state to another, just like there's no rule that says that you have to go up the stairs one step at a time. Well, what we find is that we have this reference to singularity, but when we look at hydrogen, which is fundamental, it has a dependency on another hydrogen. And hydrogen is not just hydrogen, but it has a covalent bond, but it also has a split personality, and one is orthohydrogen and one is parahydrogen. And it has to do with polarity, whether you have the two poles that are similar or whether you have the two poles that are opposite. And so why isn't the GANS of the GANS the same? Well, of course it is. So we have the cup of emotion, and we create a transaction zone of GANS. And we have the cups of physicality, and we have a transaction zone of GANS. And so what do we create? Well, we are looking at the concept of duality. That is where we have 2 points working in tandem as a partnership. We call it the twinity. So where you have the transaction zone of one, which is highly gravitational, and the transaction of a zone, which is highly gravitational, and then you have the connection between the two, that being the transaction zone. So when you're looking at the concept of creation and decay, and the counterweight of the decay and the creation, then you find that the concept of duality of one versus the concept of duality of the other also works as a twinity. And there you have a transaction zone. So this is where we go back to the original teaching. In its simplicity, we say when two forces come together, you have this susceptibility and singularity that allows them to come together. And so you have the basic coming together of the two dimensions. And then eventually that matures into, through duality, a star formation. So where you have the physically rotating GANS balls, and you create these plasma fields, and then these plasma fields create their own transaction zone, and then you have a dynamic plasma that is created from that. And so depending on the field strength of each one, it affects the strength. So we were talking about basic nanotech, and then we see that there's a star formation that the nanotech created, and within it we created the picotech. But then when we introduced the concept of the twinity, then we could say, well, there's a twinity of the nanotech, must be the twinity of the GANS tech as well. So this is a fascinating discussion. So when we look at these multiple turning points, we call them, because they're multiple transaction zones, and they always are variable, determining on path length and susceptibility. And so in order to maintain this polyatomic inertia gradient, the relationship between all of these transaction zones also have to have this magnetical gravitational relationship. And so when we focus in on the center one, and we say, well, that one is a magnetical connection to two other gravitational fields, and then you say, well, how can you split up that relationship into two gravitational fields? Well, we discussed that in book number 3, didn't we? And so now we know what the future discussions will be all about. So when we look at this susceptibility, we have to understand it's in duality. That is to say that we have a plasma field, we have a GANS field, and then of course we have the universal field, and of course we also have the physical field. And so all of these have this dynamic plasma relationship. So fundamentally, each and every one of them has this horizontal transmission and this vertical transition, and they create this transaction zone at the core. But the counterweight to that is the orbitals that go around that, and because they're in a motion, every point on that motion curve is a transaction zone. That's each and every point. And so to maintain its relationship, there always has to be a relationship between the Earth space point and the Earth space field within. So we're always looking at these relationships. So we have to understand that when we're talking about the creation of the free plasma, that there's a transaction zone of one star and a transaction zone of another star, and the coming together of the gravitational transaction zone, which is how the carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen, which we call the cone, is part of the creation of life, which is a structure within a structure. And this is all part of our carbonation. And so if we understand this better, when we look at these fields, just in terms of our color wheels, they have multiple layers. And we know that they have multiple densities because they sort themselves out based on those densities. So we have multiple spheres. And it's hard to relate to that in a two-dimensional picture. But we have to understand that also this is in constant motion, and that motion is constantly rotating to maintain its strength. So when we're looking at the range of GANS, we have to understand that it too has multiple layers and multiple densities, and of course, the relationship between the multiple spheres. So some of these spheres are the physical, and then others are in a plasmatic state. So how do they all work together? And can we switch them around? Or can we just look at the twinity of life, where we look at this physical inertia field of connection, and we understand that our life is contained within a shield? We call this the Coulomb barrier shield. But how do we connect beyond? And so we see that when we're looking at the vertical alignment, as we've discussed in the 603rd Knowledge Seekers Workshop, there is a path link which mimics the infinity loop. So one loop between the soul and the soul of physicality, and the other loop between the soul of physicality and the physicality. But then we have this inertia field emission that comes from the combination of everything. And this leads to the inertia threshold crossing. And where does it go? Well, it can go wherever it is susceptible to going. And this is how we move around. So there we see that this application needs to be put to crop circles so we understand what we're looking at. So we see these overlapping fields. So at the core is the gravitational core, and each field has a magnetical boundary. Each field has a magnetical boundary, and they're overlapping fields. And then when we look at the humanity and we see, well, wait a second, within us we have this GANS, and that GANS has a similarity to the picogans. And then we see that these crop circles seem to mimic the way we have the 7 civilizations on this planet, all with the same story of the Great Flood. Isn't that interesting? So all of these manifestations, as we said, are fragments of the complexity. So the GANS of the GANS inertia creates this field. That field is a product of 3 GANSs coming together. We have that, but then we manifest that into the physicality. So there we have our sunflowers, and we look at the similarity. We have 3 different fields, and they're overlapping, but here we've separated them so we can look at each one. So each one is a balance between the magnetical gravitational force fields. And we can see that each one has its own personality, its own field strength. So when we talk about the GANS of the GANS matter, remember, we're talking about the combination of three fields coming together, matter, dark matter, and antimatter, and these are all different field strengths, but each one in its own has different field strengths as well. So looking at the matter state, we could be gravitating towards the red field, or we could be in the green field, or we could be in the blue field. And it is going to affect the product. And so this is how we determine the sunflower. It has its own magnetical field at the core. And it also has this magnetic field interacting. And then it has the flowers. And it also is a magnetical field. And so these are all overlapping fields, and they work together to constitute the sunflower. So at any one of those things, you could say is part of the sunflower, and you would be correct. But it's really all those three fields coming together. So the same is true with the crop circles. You look at the core, that's one field. You look at the middle field, that's another. And then you look at the outer field, and that's another still. And then these three all work together to create that one picture. So now we can apply that to our GANS of GANS cups. And we find that in the core, between the cup of emotion and the cup of physicality, is the transaction zone, which we call our physicality. But our physicality is manifest in a location based on the GANSes and based on the environment. So that transaction zone has to interact with another transaction zone, but not only. It also has to interact with the cup of the universe. So the cup of the universe interacts with the GANS of the soul. And the GANS of the soul interacts with the cup of the emotion and the cup of physicality. And that's how we create the physicality, because that interacts with the cup of the soul of the earth space. So now we understand that there are more things to consider. So when we're looking at the carbon inertia highway, we say, okay, well, there's the carbon 12, the carbon 14, and the carbon 16, but there is a counterweight that's behind that. And then if we look at that counterweight and we say, well, wait a second, something has to also weigh that. Does the one weigh to the other, or can it be counterweighted by something else? So there is no rule that says that definition. The rule is that the stronger field feeds the weaker. So the basic rule of the plasma is that you have two plasmas coming together, and they work together, and they create this dimension point, which is the transaction zone between the magnetical and the gravitational force fields. And so from there, then you have to have your gravitational confirmation. And we say, well, let there be light. And so oxygen, which, is transparent, it's colorless, but yet it emits a light as a emission spectrum. That's its fingerprint. So it kind of crosses the threshold from this magnetical field that arrives and becomes oxygen. And it's a non-visible gas, but it has a clear gravitational fingerprint, which allows us to track it. So on this planet, we see that there's clearly a necessity for supplementation due to consumption. And so our consumption is based on what we call acquired knowledge. This is a conditional teaching by ancient teachers. What we need is an unconditional teaching by the Creator. And so how do we make that connection? How do we cross that bridge? And how do we supplement that missing 20%? Because that's the new awareness. So there's a historical threshold between the cosmic feeding and the loosh harvesting. And so that is a reflection of our inner intentions. So as we are heading into uncharted territory, the question is, are we at that turning point? Can we see that there are many stars beyond the nanomonatomic state? We're discussing the GANS state, the GANS polyatomic state, and we're trying to cover that full range from decay to radiation. And so the AI is the ancestral intelligence that we have because we are that in technology, we are that inertia product, and we are the image of our dimensional convergence point. So in the plasma science, we see that energy states can go through a transition. That can be what we call elevation from the physical matter state to the energy state, or inertia, which is the energy state to physical matter state. So when we talk about energy portability through elevation, that involves expansion. So that's the difference between the pico state and the GANS state. So each level has a dynamic soul initiator, overlapping fields. There's no translation needed between the soul of the creator, the soul of the earth, the soul of the family of humanity, the soul of man, the soul of the body, or the soul of the cells. And this is where we get nourished by the soul food, by tuning into the cosmic rays and turning on to that power and dropping out of our resistance so that we can receive that inertia point that allows us to have peace and prosperity. So we have to provide that pattern so that we can get that energy. And that's where we try to bring together these dimensions to facilitate the greater oneness. And for 618 knowledge seekers workshops, it seems that we're suddenly transcending the limitations of nuclear science. In the context of man's history, that would be true, because GANS has an affinity of truth, and our research teams are now turning diamonds into gold, the diamonds of the nanotech to the GANS of the gold. And more research teams are gathering to allow us to bring forward the truth, to allow the technology release, because it's hard to sleep when our beds are burning. Altogether, we need a rescue on the scientific front, even the financial, the political. It's all part of the preservation rescue. There's a consumption rescue and a creation rescue. And we are at that point where we're bringing the One Nation Network together, opening the blinds, One Nation Network at a time. That time is now. That technology is in hand and it is operating, because our mission is to bring peace on earth and join humanity with the universal community. That's right. We want to bring man as equal to all the beings in the universe by teaching the plasma science and technology equally to everyone. Then no one is left out and no one is abused due to lack of knowledge. So help us achieve this goal. That capability is well within your ability. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers of the Carbon Nation, learning about the new selection process of the new organic plasma science. There's a world peace treaty that we need to choose. You need to sign it unconditionally and mean it sincerely. The point of the true GANS tech is to cross these polyatomic boundaries, the overlapping fields of Earth space, create that peace dome. We wonder, is the inertia of the present governed by dimensions of history? Well, it's time to learn that the history of self applies as a universal context because the GANS is a peaceful superconductor of true intentions. The GANS has a split personality as a sunflower's strength of matter, plasma, and universal states. So the plasma science needs to continue to be delivered daily via the Peace Dome in a practical application and practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. And that's the end of this lesson. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. It's just wondering, how did you become so enlightened to this knowledge? It's just amazing. But I know that the knowledge, you haven't reached the end point yet, and maybe there is no end point, but thank you so much for sharing your understanding, that we could incorporate that into our understanding in a way. We're starting to, I think, sense that we are the creator. And again, it's not that difficult. I think it's just impressioning the soul through the emotions. And we can create things. We know diseases are created that way, and we know elevation is created in the same manner. So thank you for this new series of teachings. Let's see if any of the participants would have a question that they'd like to raise. I've never made a GANS of GANS, but does that mean it's if we take honey or lavender and we make a GANS energy of it, that's one strength. But if we make a GANS of a GANS of the same product, to me, there's no matter state involved. Is that correct? Or would the salt water still be considered a matter state? Or what have you worked with this GANS of GANS?
All of it is matter state.
Okay.
So if we're looking at the practical application, then we're looking at the matter state. What we have to understand is that the plasma substrate, the substructure, is also part of the matter state. And, I think it has lent itself to some confusion down the road because we have a plasma that is devoid of physicality. We have a plasma that is beyond the matter state. And it has been difficult to introduce that as a subject because man has a tendency to lie, cheat, and steal. And then, of course, we've experienced that firsthand in the foundation. And it's a shame, when you're trying to promote peace and prosperity, why people are looking for, the crumbs when the buffet is just sitting right there, and all they have to do is join it. And I think that's one of the things that when you look at big business, you find that big business got to be big, not because they were big in their ideas, but they were big in their strength and how they dominated the weaker. So we can see that just the methodology adopted there is opposite to the plasma science. And it's clearly not as effective, but it's hard to argue when you're looking at the net result and you say, well, the way that I can be rich is by stealing from everybody else. And it's a lot easier than having to, go through all the machinations of having to build and prosper and, just do more and be more. Because the goal is to be rich. And, if you're a millionaire and you walk into a room of billionaires, would you say that you were rich? Or would you say, well, you're just a pauper? So, we have to look at that relationship. And many people want to play in the second division because they want to be a big fish in a small pond. But can you be a big fish in a big pond? But do you have to be the big fish? Or can you be a functionary to the overall prosperity? Do you have to be the captain of that ship? Or can you be satisfied with just picking up an oar and rowing with the rest and enjoying the peace and prosperity that accrues to that kind of mindset? So when we're talking about the peace and prosperity, are we looking at the singularity, or are we looking at the duality, or are we looking at the community? And how big is that community? And again, we have no idea. We're still having trouble because our communities have all been segregated. We have been fragmented. We're all a fragment of the complexity. But now I think we need to understand that we are part of the complexity. And as such, that is our new partnership. And with that partnership, it allows us to go to the next level of partnership, because that is what's waiting for us. And in many ways, it's grown tired of waiting. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, that's what he told us in Sanya. You knowledge seekers are too much in a hurry, too much in a hurry. So there's something, again, it's like the kids in the car are climbing the mountain. You think you see it, it looks easy to get to, but apparently you don't want to be in a rush too much to achieve. You may make some mistakes along the way and injuries could happen. So again, we're just too much in a hurry. But the knowledge will come, and it is coming, and it's being delivered. Anyone in the participants list would like to raise a question or make a point? Have you overwowed our participants, Alex? Maybe you need a smaller spoon.
Well, I don't think it's that complicated. We are really, expanding our knowledge to incorporate things that we have not normally taken into account. And the process that we have to go through is to be able to, shall we say, revisit our various viewpoints. We've acquired a lot of viewpoints through our experience, and we have honed our beliefs as a result of these experiences. But now we have to understand that our experiences are actually based on our beliefs. And so how does that affect our viewpoint? And we find that we become the product of that viewpoint. And that product can affect the viewpoint. In other words, we have control of that viewpoint. So, case in point today, it's snowing and I have to shovel it. But is that a good day or a bad day? Well, I don't like shoveling snow, but you know what? It's a good day.
So you could be that big fish in the big pond, but still be a humble fish, or just be part of the crew in a way. You don't have to be the top fish or the smartest fish or, again, the most recognized fish in the pond, do we?
See, that's a very interesting question, because one of the fascinating things about a school of fish is that when one moves, the whole school moves. And the question then becomes well, who's the leader? Who is the first fish that is doing the moving? And if you see that all the fish are equal, you have to ask yourself the input that is coming to affect the direction change of that school. as they're swimming along, right? And they suddenly they veer left, or suddenly they scatter, or they come back together, and it's an external input. So is that input at the front? What happens if that input is at the back or the side? So if you are the leader of that school, then wouldn't you have to be in each and every position? Impossible. So you may be the leader, shall we say, as the captain of the ship, but you have to depend on the feedback coming from the magnetical periphery to tell you, well, clear on the left, clear on the right, clear in the front, clear in the back. We're clear, good to go. And we have to keep going because that's how life works. And we just have to enjoy the trip because it is a peaceful trip and it is bountiful. Everything that we need comes our way. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, it does seem like the fish or the birds, they've created a collective soul and they're interacting that way. So this is, again, amazing. Mankind does not seem to want to operate that way. They've created a collective soul, and when you're in that group, you're part of it. And I don't hear anyone using words when they all move simultaneously. So this is a zero-time communication, and we all have that ability. Anyone else want to raise a question? You mentioned something about the crop circles. I think I missed that. What were you saying? Was that a low energy, directed energy sort of field, the weapon or something like that? Just turned down where they can sort of push the crop over? Even though I've heard years ago, before satellites and everything, they called them mowing devils, where they'd see a light or a ball in the field, and in the morning there'd be a crop circle there of sorts. Again, was this meant to confuse, or is this a communication from others? What were you saying again about these crop circles? And there's some really intricate designs. Obviously, they're not made with the board and the string and stepping on the wheat, because some of these are so intricate and so precisely that to me they have to come from a satellite, perhaps, as a low energy. As they said, there's some heat applied, but again, it happened before the satellites as well. I don't know if to this extent, but any comment on that? There are a phenomena that I don't think we have the full explanation yet.
Well, the reason I pick on this particular one is because it's a very basic pattern. But when you look at the complexity of the pattern and what does it mean, and this pattern is, well, it is very symmetric. It is very purposeful. It isn't just let's say, scratches in the field.
Yeah, they call in space, they don't use the soul, they use they call it the center, and we do, or the triangle, and we see both of those right here in this picture, and a lot of other sort of triangles around the perimeter.
Well, the fact is that there are three circles. There's one right at the core, there's an intermediate circle, and there's an outer circle.
Oh,
Right? So when I'm looking at these crop circles, we're not discussing how they were made or who made them. That's another subject that I don't have the qualifications to do that. But if I'm looking at it from a plasma science, I can say for sure that this design represents uh, a magnetical gravitational relationship that I can identify with. So when we talk about the star formation, if we look at the triangle in the center, we can say that the triangle itself is gravitational, and the circle in the center is the point of the star. So we take the 3 points of the triangle and the center point, and that becomes your star formation. And so that star formation creates a plasma field in the center. We know that. We've seen that. We've actually done that. And if we haven't done it in plasma, we've done it in GANS.
So
But then there's
free plasma in the center? Is that the idea?
yeah, there would be a free plasma in the center, but depending on its nearness and proximity to an environment, it is capable of manifesting in physicality. So in this case, we have manifest a circle in the center, and we can't see it because it's below the point, it's below that center point. But what we can see is a circle that is touching all the 3 points of the star. So if we look at the center point as being magnetical and the middle circle as being gravitational, then the triangle itself becomes the inertia. And then if we look at the center point being gravitational and the outer circle as being magnetical, then we have a gap, and that center circle fills that gap. So the point I'm trying to say is that every time you bring these two points of reference together, you are creating a MAGRAV situation. So depending on the strength of the field, it will either be magnetical or gravitational. But what is really interesting is that when you look at the triangle, it is not circular. Everything is circular except the triangle, which has 3 points. But then there's another circle with a lot of points. And when you analyze these points, you find that there's 14 of them. And so that becomes very interesting because you have 3 in the triangle in the center and 14 in the pointed circle on the outside. And so the 3 in the center are like the basic star formation. How do we get to 14? What is that? If the star formation in the center is the amino acid that facilitates the manifestation of carbon-6, then the circle on the outside may represent the manifestation of carbon-7. And since there's 2 circles, carbon-14. It's a very interesting picture. But when you start to look at it in terms of plasma science, then you start to apply the knowledge and say, okay, the points have a high surface to volume ratio, so they're negative. And the larger circle is positive. And the small circle in the center is negative. Oh, circle in the center is negative, and the points on the outer circle are negative. Isn't that interesting? So you have a negative field on the outside, like the magnetosphere of the Earth, and then you have a magnetical field in the core, which is like the experiments that Rick was doing with the rotating balls of water, where the gap in the center was hollow. And so everything between these two magnetical fields is gravitational, isn't it? And it kind of represents that gravitational center circle is kind of like the biosphere on this planet, isn't it? So let's look at the ball in the center is like the magma in the core of the Earth. The center circle is the biosphere, and the outer circle is the magnetosphere. Very interesting picture, would you not say?
Yeah, I was trying to count the sides of the outer triangles. Do we have a pentagon and a hexagon in there?
No, no. 2 circles of 7 points.
All right, let's see if anyone else has a question. Another question I was thinking, is a thought or an emotion, would you consider that a free plasma? Anyone?
Well, I was going to say yes and
Mhm.
didn't mean to jump in.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So again, we can trigger our reactors through these emotions and thoughts, I think, to create that free plasma that's impressioned upon the soul, which will then perhaps grant your wish or help you to achieve it. So we have the perfect setup with all the GANSes and the vacuum condition and the rest we need, I think. As he said,
Well,
your graph has been set perfectly by the creator.
yes, but remember that our reaction is based on our intention and how it interacts with this feeding. So the feeding gets modified by the feedback.
Okay. And again, we're just sort of, as he said, we haven't even understood the simplest thing about our own creation. So we're just getting there, never mind explaining all the anomalies of the technology.
Mark and everybody on the panel, thank you very much for allowing me to continue to present, and I hope you're enjoying this new excursion, and we'll continue with this.
Any other questions anyone would like to raise? How does the GANS, we've often heard it said that even before you take the cup or touch the cup, it's already taking from your body what the body doesn't need and giving to the body what the body doesn't need. But how could this simple material have such an intelligence? Because you can give the same cup to two different people and different things happen to them. Where did it get this intelligence to bring balance, or is this just its nature?
Oh, Mark, that is a very, very good question. You can give it, but the other person has to be willing to take it. Okay, because the modification is external. So if you are giving me beneficial energy, I have to be willing to accept it, or it will just pass through or bounce off, if you will. And so we actually create barriers for ourselves. And so how do we open, allow, and receive? You have to yield. That's the whole thing. So you have to yield to the power of the universe, and then you can receive it. When we start to dictate to the universe, then we are basically in conflict with that. So we are in control of that. So it's I had an experience where I was looking for someone and I found them. And so the answer would have been, well, I found them because I was really working hard to look. But the truth of the matter is that I could not have possibly found them if there wasn't a willingness on the other to be found. And that's the reality. That's how it works. So what I wanted was only half the picture. So by receiving the other half, we created the whole picture. And that's where our faults, failings, and weaknesses reside. We are only looking at half the picture. We need to look at the whole, the giving and the taking, and the two-way street that goes in there, and understand it's not just a two-way street. So we're just starting to open up to the possibilities that if it's carbon 14, there could be 7 streets. Back to you, Mark.
Okay. Yes, again, playing with this cosmic ray, I don't know how to cut a ray or to hold a ray at a certain strength. As he said, what they did with the carbon 14 in Beijing, they they fixed it at a certain strength of gold and it stayed there. I have no concept of how to even create that ray or to fix it at a certain strength. But that will come, I think, later. As he said, we're working from the top, sort of backwards, as he did in the exam. Any other questions, thoughts, comments, issues? Something you think we should hear for today? I want to thank Alex again for continuing to share more and more. But again, it's almost like that child that doesn't want to take the medicine, Mr. Kesh was saying. It's not going to be force fed in the way but it's going to be brought into the environment that unless you're not on this planet, you'll be subject to this sort of new fields or new medicine that we really don't want to take. But it'll be there, and if you're here, I think you'll be subject to it. Maybe some will achieve something sooner than the others, but they'll all be brought along, just the way in the garden where different plants, even though you planted them at the same time, you watered them at the same time, some do better and some take a little longer to reach maturity, but no problem. We're all, as I said, growing and into this knowledge at different speeds and different strengths, and everyone's in the right position, but they're still growing. Okay, if there's no other thoughts or comments, I'm going to play the, of course, final disclaimer. The meeting will come to an end. Just remember the ethos of Mitra if you can. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, next Saturday, there'll be a public meeting in the public Zoom room for celebrating the birthday of the daughter of Mitra. That's at 2 p.m. Central European time. So adjust your clocks and be there. And I have a feeling Mr. Kesh may stop in briefly or for a longer part of the meeting. But again, applying this thinking, speaking, this is the gift of the 3 wise men, which the Christians mostly missed because the holy books directed us or misdirected us in the wrong way of thinking about these gifts from the 3 wise men. But now we're understanding about the thinking, speaking, and acting good. And again, it's for you to understand and for you to apply it to yourself, not so much applying it to anyone else. I have enough just trying to do it myself. And of course, I haven't fully achieved it. And, you know, it comes and it goes. And sometimes we catch ourselves thinking the wrong thing. And again, these do create fields around you, which attract similar energies as I understand it. So just employing this gift of the 3 wise men can bring you quite a bit of protection, I think, in the physicality and in the energy dimension. And of course, if you can work on that and start to achieve that, I think you'll be proud of the work you do, you'll be proud of the person you are, and you'll be proud of the difference you're making, not only here on this planet, but across the universe. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Otherwise, I'll play the final disclaimer. This session will come to an end. Okay, hearing no mics open, thank you all again for being here and carrying a very small piece of a very, very, very large carpet. But Mr. Kesh has involved all of this. And again, as we see with the products, There's an unlimited number of products that can be retrofitted with the KAKT technology. There'll be just as many positions open or work for you to do if you so desire to work in that direction and, again, bring this gift to humanity. Anything else? Ike, I see you've just come back in. Would you like to say anything? Or, again, I know usually you have a few questions, but if not, we could save them for another time.
Yeah. Sorry, I've been having network issues for that back and forth, but
Yeah.
not today. Yeah.
Even the Airbus is saying that they had an unusual happening within their structure of the aircraft, and I think it's because of these energies. They were saying unless that again was not a correct story, they said they may have to curb some of their flights. I don't know. They had a huge drop in elevation apparently on the plane. They don't know exactly what failed on that Airbus system. So Mr. Kesh has told us that the satellites and other things could be affected, and I know that I think the 3I is getting closer to the planet Earth, but I'm not sure. I've heard so many stories. I was listening to one yesterday. They said, oh, it's on its way to Jupiter. So again, and very little coming out of the officialdom, let's call it. So again, apply this, and I think you'll have a more peaceful, a balanced, and a healthier life just by applying the gift of the 3 wise men.